The triumph that wasn't.
We thought we were going to die for a little while.
We're there as passengers finally disembark early this morning. Stranded for days. Garbage and toilets backed up. Forced to sleep in tents on the poop deck.
5 days of one flush.
No electricity, no air conditioning, and not enough answers.
Clearly, we failed.
So tonight, we try to ask the tough questions.
I wonder if you could take a few more questions, like, do you really?
What keeps happening on these ships, and who should pay? High and dry. Plus, the Costa Concordia, a year later, still dead in the water, while victims try to rebuild their lives and recover their loved ones still missing.
You just can't take a pill and get over it.
And whatever happened to the so-called chicken of the sea? The captain who went MIA when the lights went out.
There were no women and children first. Ladies, you're on your own.
Ghost ship and cruise ship confidential. What's really going on in the cabin next door? What do staff insiders say?
All the action is below the waterline. The average crew deck makes a sorority house look like a nunnery.
The secret underground of sex and liquor below deck.
If there's an empty cabin, that'll be the cabin where everybody goes to have sex.
What happens when you're trapped by rough seas, rough passengers, and even rougher germs? Troubled waters. Here now, David Muir.
Good evening. And so many families, so many couples just getting home tonight after days trapped at sea on that Carnival cruise ship, Triumph. The real triumph, though, those passengers simply getting through it all. The so-called cruise from hell finally docking in Alabama. 5 days after a terrifying engine fire knocked out power and turned that ship into what some called a floating petri dish. There was suffering, fortunately not the casualties of last year's Costa Concordia, but all of it does raise serious questions. And so tonight here, we put a microscope on the industry as a whole. Why was an ultimate rescue so late in coming? And were the apologies too little, too late? Matt Gutman, on this from the start, was on that dock getting answers.
The thousands of stranded passengers knew their ordeal was finally over. And this morning, they came pouring out of the crippled ship. It was an untriumphant return.
We get to go home.
Standing on and in some cases kissing terra firma for the first time in 8 days.
Yeah, you can talk to us. Come on over.
I'm speechless. It's just really great to finally be back in America and on land.
Some angry.
The doctor on the staff can, excuse my French, he can kiss my.
It was the worst experience I've ever had. We thought we were going to die for a little while.
Others relieved.
I'm just happy to be alive. It's quite an ordeal, but we're here.
They ran, many wearing bathrobes against the cold, to plant kisses on loved ones, holding on to each other. By the hundreds, they were stuffed onto buses before they could even shower or even change their gritty clothes. Among the first out, Stephanie Stevenson and Rob Mallum. Not just your regular cruisers, they were headed for the tropics for a reason, a romantic wedding at sea. He's in a tie, she's in white. But marital bliss would turn into maritime nightmare early on Sunday morning, 3 days into the cruise.
Looked over the side rail and you could see the just billows and billows of smoke coming out of the top of the stack.
Were you scared?
I was pretty freaked out.
A fire had erupted in the engine room and some passengers go into Titanic mode.
They said Alpha Team to the engine room.
Attention, code Alpha engine room.
People take it upon themselves to strap on life jackets and scramble towards the lifeboats.
I saw the smoke. I knew good and well there was a good chance the ship would be sinking.
The fire had burned out the ship's main engines. The sparkling city on the sea, known as the fun ship you see in these Carnival ads, was now not much more than a 100,000-ton cork bobbing in the Gulf of Mexico. The electricity cuts out. Everything goes dark. Carly Jackson and Jody Adelhauser are jazzercise instructors from Paris, Texas.
All of the power shut off at like once. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is like Titanic.
The lower decks fill with smoke, engulfing some of the cafeterias. They even see it billowing from the stack.
The smoke has gotten worse.
Then the air conditioning goes out. Still, the crew assures the passengers that everything is under control.
Nothing to worry about, folks. You can wait up on the Lido deck. It's really lovely out there.
An automated system extinguishes the fire, but the ship stays dead in the water. By Monday, 24 hours after the crisis began, Carnival decided to tow the ship not to nearby Mexico, but to Mobile, Alabama, because not everybody had passports with them. That added nearly 350 miles and an extra day of hardship for passengers.
I'm not liking that.
By this time, 2 other Carnival cruise ships had been diverted to deliver food and water to the hobbled vessel. Helicopters were also deployed carrying generators and other supplies on Wednesday.
They came in, dropped off water and stuff, but that didn't stop babies from going hungry. That didn't stop other people from hoarding food.
Wow.
But despite their efforts, conditions aboard the Triumph were deteriorating fast. No electricity, not enough running water, and almost no cell phone service, leaving parents and loved ones on land frantic.
I just need to know that she's okay.
The ship, 300 yards long, equipped with every amenity, and now the more than 4,000 aboard could only communicate in snippets of text messages.
We're in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico.
36 hours into the crisis, no hot food, no hot water, no AC, and the ship was listing.
When we were leaning one way, it was kind of a little nerve-wracking.
Worst of all, backed up toilets. There was sewage everywhere.
We got one flush, one time.
5 days, one flush.
5 days, one flush.
For toilets, the ship handed out these red bags.
People were using the restroom in little red plastic bags and throwing them out into the hallway.
We were in shock. We were like, I'm not using a red bag.
The thing is you just don't eat. You just don't eat.
To not have to use the red bag,
Controlling the colon. You just don't eat.
We met a couple that we were talking to that said her husband was laying in bed and just the ceiling fell down on him full of
urine, feces, all of that.
Yeah.
The stench and heat driving people to camp out on the decks. They built tent cities out of bed sheets.
We've been shipwrecked for, I guess, 3 days now.
ABC News was the first to fly out over the ship on Wednesday. You can tell how powerful the wind is, gusting at 25 miles an hour. Those conditions bringing out the worst in some people.
They opened the bar one evening and gave away free drinks, and that was a really bad idea. There were people throwing things over the side of the ship, acting unruly.
And during the voyage, passengers did receive updates on the PA system as well as printed status updates, but Rob Mallon thinks that was another poor decision.
Somehow they managed to print us out little letters that they sent to our room.
Maybe they were using the emergency generator to supply printers instead of toilets.
Yes.
Folks hoarding food, forcing others onto a diet of onion sandwiches.
What was the food situation like?
You had to stand in line for 3 hours to get a meal. And the first couple days it was the onion sandwiches.
But at least they were steadily, if slowly, being tugged back to the U.S. That's when Mike Padilla finally got through to his wife on the phone, anxiously waiting her return.
They think the tug line might have just broken.
Passengers say this should never have happened. Just last week, Carnival admitted that there was an electrical problem on the Triumph's previous voyage, but said there is no evidence at this time of any relationship between this previous issue and the fire that occurred on February 10th. This is the latest in a string of incidents involving cruise ships. Last year, the Costa Concordia capsized in Italy, killing 32 passengers. And in 2010, another Carnival ship, the Splendor, was stranded for days after another engine fire. Unlike the airline industry, there's no agency regulating the safety operations of cruise lines. Jim Walker is a maritime lawyer.
And unlike our U.S. aviation, commercial aviation fleet in the States that has the FAA that can oversee the industry and actually shut a fleet down if there's safety violations, there's no one looking out for the safety of passengers on ships relative to fires.
A spokesman for the cruise industry denies there's no regulation. I know you can't talk to me, but is there anybody who can? For 3 days, not a single Carnival exec appeared publicly until CEO Jerry Cahill spoke late Tuesday.
We pride ourselves in providing our guests with a great vacation experience, and clearly we failed in this particular case.
Carnival has offered the passengers a full refund, a voucher for another cruise, and $500 and it will cover travel expenses.
Oh my God, it's degrading, demoralizing. And then they want to insult us by giving us $500.
Since Sunday, ABC News has been requesting answers to questions about the ship's history of mechanical problems. No answer. They did hold 3 press conferences, but answered very few questions.
I'm sorry, Mr. Thornton. Matt Gutman from ABC News. Thank you for taking the time today. But I wonder if you could take a few more questions, like, do you really? You're running away.
We've been trying to track down anybody from Carnival to talk to us. And the company's chief marketing officer, he also retreated.
We're on our way.
2 minutes. But one thing that did go right in the end for Carnival was bringing that colossus of a ship up this narrow channel in darkness. And after 8 days at sea, the most precious of cargo delivered back to family members.
You guys gonna sleep tonight?
I'm gonna shower and then I'm gonna sleep.
We're showering. We had our food, now just a long shower, long hot shower.
I really want to get home though.
And for the newlyweds, a delayed wedding banquet of burgers and fries.
This is gonna be the best hamburger ever.
Never was there a couple so happy to trade a cruise for a bus.
When we got on the bus, we went back and we flushed the toilet just to make sure it worked.
And 2 other notes tonight. It's your tax dollars that help pay the price of these rescues by the Coast Guard, leading some to ask tonight, should the cruise lines be paying more? And as for size, the Carnival Corporation owns nearly half the industry, 10 brands, 100 ships worldwide. The industry is still growing. ABC's own parent company, Disney, has 4 ships of its own. We'll be right back.
Next, the Costa Concordia, more than a year later, still stuck on its side. The images we can't forget, and survivors still reliving the nightmare.
I haven't slept one good night since.
My girls have had nightmares.
And what about the captain who abandoned ship?
We have children, we have babies, and he's the first person off the ship.
But get this, he's suing to get his old job back. Coming up.
This nightmare for Carnival passengers comes just over a year since the Costa Concordia became the largest passenger ship ever to capsize. That accident, of course, turning deadly. Some 4,200 people on board rescued in those waters. Tonight here, we're back on the scene. Why is the ship still lying on its side all these months later? And have we learned anything to make passengers safer? Dan Harris went back to Italy to find out.
It was one of the largest, costliest, and arguably most infamous cruise ship disasters since the Titanic.
Get the kids, go.
The Costa Concordia, a 15-story luxury liner which ran aground off the coast of Italy on Friday the 13th of January 2012, killing 32 people. But in the last 13 months, as the story has faded from the headlines, what has happened to the man they called Captain Coward, blamed for causing the crash and abandoning ship? To the passengers who barely escaped? And what about the massive ship itself? We took a journey to find out. On a ferry off the coast of Tuscany, an hour into our voyage, it came looming into sight.
That is extraordinary.
A 60,000-ton behemoth beached in pristine, environmentally sensitive waters.
More than a year after the Costa Concordia went down, here it is. It's still here, surrounded by cranes and other vessels, which are involved in an extraordinary, expensive, risky, and unprecedented salvage operation. The plan is deceptively simple: to turn this hulking mass of steel upright and simply float it away.
It is an audacious plan. They are welding a series of enormous buoyancy tanks to one side of the boat, which will be used to rotate it upright. It will land, they hope, on an enormous steel bed and then be floated to the surface and towed away to a scrapyard. It could cost more than $500 million, and it might not even work. It is a far cry from the ship's heyday. Before she was rusting and rotting, she was a glittery showpiece with more than 18 restaurants and bars. Her captain, a made-for-TV villain named Francesco Schettino, who favors dark suits, sunglasses, and slick-back hair, and who, in the dark of night, 3 hours into a 10-day cruise, decided to attempt a risky maneuver, taking the ship off course to give a sail-by salute to honor a fellow captain who lived on the tiny island of Giglio. but the ship came too close and hit an underwater rock. For an hour, as panic set in, the crew told the 3,200 passengers to return to their cabins, that it was just a minor technical problem. By the time Captain Scatino got around to issuing the abandoned ship order, the vessel was in chaos, with people pushing one another to get onto the lifeboats, and some of them jumping to their deaths. Lynn Kalin from Seattle documented the confusion.
Because we were literally in pitch black on this huge ship, and no one had any directions whatsoever. It was total chaos.
Members of the Ananias family from California were among the last off the ship.
We knew that this was the end for us.
We told our daughters that go ahead, our life, we've
Save
lived, save yourselves. And they told us no, we go as a family.
Meanwhile, Captain Scatino was long gone. He later said he tripped and fell into a lifeboat. A Coast Guard official was recorded screaming at the captain to go back and help. Damn it, he said, go back on board. There were heroes that night, including the people of Giglio Island. On that terrible night, many of the passengers and crew jumped into these frigid waters and swam over to these rocks, where they were tended to by complete strangers who live in this little port village. The mayor, Sergio Ortelli, made an extraordinary decision. You ordered people to open up their homes and businesses to the survivors. Why did you do that? Some of them were soaking wet and frightened. Many of them were elderly, he said, and many of them children. Giuseppe Modesti still cries when he recalls the night when the town opened its arms to the wet and the wounded. It's tough for you to talk about, emotional. My mind goes back to that night, he said, and the emotions from those days return. In the immediate aftermath, the island was flooded with family members like Kevin Rebello, who we met as he was looking for his brother Russell, a waiter on the Concordia.
My instinct says he's somewhere around. I hope he's alive.
4 weeks ago, Giglio once again hosted survivors and victims' family members for the one-year anniversary. Kevin Rebello was there, his brother still missing and now counted as one of the dead.
For us, it's very important to have a body to take him home. For me and for my family, it's very important.
There was a procession and later a minute of silence at the exact moment, 9:45 p.m., when the Concordia ran aground. 32 lanterns carrying messages for those who did not survive.
There's still a lot of not understanding why we survived and other people didn't. And that is something that's very, very hard to live with.
This week, we caught up again with Lynn Kalin, who captured those haunting images from the Costa Concordia. She says watching this latest cruise ship crisis unfold in the Gulf brings it all back for her.
It brings back the memories of the night when we literally went over on the cruise ship. I feel so sorry for those people because I know what it's like being stuck on a cruise ship and not being able to get off.
One of the major ongoing frustrations for the survivors, lawsuits against Carnival Cruise Lines, which owns the Costa Concordia, are unlikely to go far. Maritime law is not generous to victims of disasters. The most you can probably collect for wrongful death or severe injury, roughly 60 grand. Lynn Kalin collected just over $9,000.
It definitely doesn't cover the stress in our going to psychiatrists and things like that, and all of our belongings on the ship, and we're still living with it.
I haven't slept one good night since the accident.
My girls have had nightmares. One of them is saying that she's at an angle, like at a tilt, constantly in the dream.
So what has become of the man who is allegedly to blame for this accident? Captain Scatino is at his home near Naples under court orders. Since the crash, he's been publicly defending his actions.
Lei non crede di aver commesso un crimine? Assolutamente no.
Calling himself a hero, blaming his subordinates, and saying he has no regrets.
Io rifarei quello che ho fatto, visto?
And here's the kicker. He is now suing the cruise company to get his job back. That comment drives Lynn Kalin up a wall.
I don't understand how someone that has done what he has done could even consider him working for the industry ever again.
Get the kids, go, go.
He didn't know what was going on with us. We have children, you have babies, and he's the first person off the ship. Where was his compassion for us?
In weeks, a judge is expected to announce whether there's enough evidence to indict Scatino on manslaughter, causing a wreck, and abandoning ship. The man they call the Chicken of the Sea may be looking at life behind bars. Meanwhile, after a series of delays, salvage crews hope to be able to remove the Costa Concordia from her watery resting place this September. For those whose family members died, however, the losses will remain incalculable.
In the months after the Costa Concordia disaster, the cruise industry facing a huge image problem. New bookings dropped, cancellations skyrocketed, and Carnival and other cruise line operators had to cut their rates to attract new passengers. Many asking tonight, will the same thing happen now after the Triumph? We'll be right back.
Next, when going overboard with your partying turns into overboard, period.
How in the hell did I get here?
Falling 10 stories into the pitch black and left behind in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. When 2020 continues. "2020 returns. Man Overboard, now with John Quinones.
No! There's a man overboard.
Straight ahead! Straight ahead! He's yelling straight ahead.
As a rescue boat searches the dark sea.
He's way out there. You can hear him.
Moments later.
He's laying right there.
A man, after floating for 3 hours, is pulled from the water alive. They're more than just cruise ships, they're floating cities. But no one fears falling off a city. The same can't be said for these colossal vessels. The numbers are foggy, but some estimate that every 2 weeks someone goes overboard. 23 known cases last year. Most simply vanished. Only one was found dead, and 4 lived to tell their story. Passengers like Tim Sears.
Last thing I remember is looking for my friend in the casino.
It's 2003, aboard Carnival's Celebration cruise ship. As in many of these cases, Tim Sears, then 31, had too much to drink. That's the last detail he remembers before falling 10 stories into the Gulf of Mexico, 50 miles offshore.
I'm coming to in the middle of the water, and there's no ship around, and it's total darkness.
Pitch black in the middle of the ocean. Tim asks himself,
how in the hell did I get here? I mean, to be honest with you, that was my very first thought, was how in the world did I end up here in the middle of the water with no ship around?
He can see next to nothing.
A few varying lights way off in the distance, and that's about it. Fairly quickly, I realized I didn't have any pants, any shoes. All I had on was boxers and a sweatshirt and a t-shirt on.
No one knows Tim is missing, but he's not alone.
I can actually remember looking around and seeing just little green, bluish, small creatures jump around, and that's all I could see for miles. And I just remember stopping and actually going, wow, this is amazing.
Tim's psychedelic friends are just bioluminescent algae. For 14 hours in shark-infested waters, Tim, a former Army paratrooper, manages to stay afloat until his mind and body say enough.
I was tired, and so I made peace with God and closed my eyes and started going down in the water, taking water in through my nose into my lungs, and no thoughts went through my head. I was ready for it to be over.
Tim says he starts to sink into the darkness, but then something happens, a light of hope that gives him a renewed determination.
And my eyes just opened, and I swam back to the top and spit the water out and decided that I was going to keep swimming.
For 3 hours, Tim struggles on. Like Tom Hanks in Castaway, he's still slowly drifting into the abyss until, in a scene straight from the movie, Tim, too, sees what he thinks is a ship on the horizon.
The waves were just enormous. Up and down. I had lost my glasses, of course. I couldn't see.
With every primal instinct to survive, Tim swims toward the boat, screaming for help. After 17 hours, a cargo ship headed for Texas plucks him out of the water.
I was asking God to send me any ship, and here any ship had rescued me. And it brought me to tears.
Cruising is very safe. It's highly unusual for a passenger to just fall overboard.
Statistically, cruising is safer than walking across the street.
That seems like it's pretty good odds, but it's not to the families that are left without their loved one.
13 years ago, Gene Scavone's son, Jimmy, was lost at sea on a Carnival cruise in the Caribbean. Since then, she's been linking families that have lost loved ones.
It's like a family, a group of us now that have this experience, and we have no answers. No one should vanish from a cruise ship. No one should leave on a vacation on a cruise ship and never come back.
There have been well-known cases of the vanished. In 2005, George Smith, the honeymooner who disappeared on a cruise, leaving behind a pool of dried blood. His family's convinced he was murdered. His body never found. Other stories of suspected foul play have received fewer headlines. Annette Meisner went on a cruise to Mexico with her parents and daughter. One evening, they discovered she was missing. The ship's crew paged her name.
When we heard that page, I knew something was wrong. My heart just fell. I panicked.
On the ship's third deck, their daughter's purse and overturned drink were found next to the railing. The ship was searched from top to bottom, and eventually the Coast Guard was called in.
They covered 833 square miles, and they did not find the body.
Meisner's disappearance remains an unsolved mystery. Her family reached an out-of-court confidential settlement with Carnival Cruise Lines. But for her family, there will never be closure, only the bitter memory of what was lost at sea.
Very difficult. You go on vacation with 4 people and you come back with 3.
While there are happy endings like Tim Sears, the tragic tales continue to take victims. 3.5 years ago, Annette's father, Wally, died from what his wife called a broken heart.
Next, think you're having fun on a vacation cruise upstairs? Wait till you hear what the crew can get up to downstairs.
Is there a lot of partying that goes on even amongst the crew members?
Amongst the crew members, that's where the party is.
The crew spills the beans. Cruise Ship Confidential, coming up. As we continue, the secret life below deck. Here's Deborah Roberts.
For millions, cruises are about sunsets, swimming, soaking up the good life. But let's face it, for many, hitting the high seas is also about hitting the hard stuff. Ever hear the expression cruise ship drunk? Well, you're looking at it. YouTube is plastered with evidence of cruise passengers gone wild. Seems there's something about being at sea that brings out the crazy in people. You might even lose your fear of heights. And it's not just passengers partying it up. Beneath the pools, the bistros, the bars, down past the sun deck and through these doors is a world few cruisers ever see. Unless you turn to YouTube, where cruise ship employees have posted a clear glimpse of life below the deck. This man saw it all.
All the action is below the waterline, all of it.
Brian David Bruns worked as a waiter aboard cruise ships until 2005, dishing about his adventures in his 3 books.
Is there a lot of partying that goes on even amongst the crew members?
Amongst the crew members, that's where the party is. The amount of alcohol and sex that's going on down there, it's paramount. The average crew deck makes a sorority house look like a nunnery. I'm not kidding.
I'm on a boat and it's going fast and I got It's plain plain to see on these crew videos. Young people from all around the world spending months at sea, working and playing aboard these floating cities. There are regular crew parties, bars designated just for the staff.
It's a big free-for-all. That's all it is.
Sherry Cecil worked on a luxury cruise liner in 2004, climbing the ladder from waitress to officer.
There's sex cabins if there's an empty cabin, and they can somehow sneak a passkey. That'll be the cabin where everybody goes to have sex.
All of it happening, she says, under the passengers' noses. While cruisers stroll the luxurious decks and enjoy beautiful cabins, on the lower floors, often below the waterline, is the crew deck. It's like a separate ship with dining areas, rec rooms, and tiny cabins housing at least 2 to a room.
The cabin is the size of a walk-in closet.
And within this little society at sea, a strict hierarchy all its own.
Is it kind of a sense of like upstairs, downstairs, you know, sort of a feeling of you're working here, they're working there, and you don't mingle?
Yes, and it's not just a feeling, it's physical as well. Staff officers, all those guys are up on the bridge decks. They never go down below the waterline. They don't even go to the crew decks if they can help it.
Unless there's a reason.
A lot of my friends in the restaurants were pretty ladies. They always had an officer that was asking them to be their ship squeeze. That's what it's called, ship squeeze. We all have one, right? And they have wives and kids back home.
When the wives come on in the families, the mistresses are put offshore for a week's vacation, and the wives leave, and on the mistresses they come back.
But it's a tougher life for crew members who say days are filled with back-breaking chores.
You work constantly. I don't want to call it a sweatshop condition, but that's really what it is. So you work 80 hours a week minimum.
80 hours a week?
I worked 15 weeks in a row at 100 hours a week. They're paying you something like $40 a month. Almost 100% of their salary come from tips from the guests. Between $1,000, maybe $3,000 on the high end a month.
Human rights groups have accused cruise lines of exploiting workers with long hours and low pay. The cruise industry says it's a problem of the past and new laws will regulate working and rest hours. Yet former employee Cecil says passengers have been deliberately kept in the dark about anything negative.
We don't tell them anything. If there's a mechanical breakdown, we do not tell them. If there is an illness outbreak, we do not tell them. We are told to lie to them.
Sherry's personal cruise story is frightening. Just 2 months into her contract after a night of drinking, she says a fellow crew member raped her in her cabin. The trauma of the attack was horrifying enough, she says. Then she told her superiors.
And my boss hauled me into his office and said, "Sherry, bad things happen to good people. You just have to put this beside you. You're just going to have to get on with your life, get over it, and get back to work. So either you show up tonight at work or you go pack your bags." I had already been raped. Was I going to lose my career?
Sherry continued working. 2 years later, she left the ship, sued the cruise line, and settled for an undisclosed amount.
They shoot first, ask questions later. If there's even a whiff of controversy, you're gone. You get pregnant, you're gone. They very much sweep it under the rug.
Still, Brian says the good outweighs the bad. He and others we talked with insist that cruise work is mostly free of serious trouble or controversy.
Would you take a cruise today?
Oh yeah, I can't wait to take a cruise. Bring it, I'm ready. Get my passport, let's go.
same care by any stretch of the imagination with what you would expect here in the United States.
I don't think that's true anymore. There certainly may have been a time where cruise lines hired retired doctors or doctors that really didn't want to work very hard. I think those days are over.
Oliver DiPietro spent more than a decade as a cruise ship doctor, as well as managing medical care for Norwegian Cruise Lines. I spoke with him from his office in Miami.
Basically, you know, people spend a lot of time researching the ports of call and the onboard activities. Nobody's checking in to see who the doctors are.
Well, I think that the cruise lines do that before they hire a ship's doctor. Most doctors today are, doctors that have emergency room experience and training. Same with the nurses.
But no matter how qualified the doctors, if something happens like it did on the Triumph,
the smell, the sewage, coming out of the bathroom, the toilets wasn't flushing.
It's trouble.
It's their worst nightmare. It's actually an unbelievably significant event. You have no hygiene.
Urine floating on the floor, feces coming down the wall.
No running water.
This is the bags that we were told to use the restroom in.
They're not able to even clean up after themselves.
Dr. Philip Tierno of NYU is an expert on microbiology and germs and says confined spaces can always breed disease. Infectious disease outbreaks are not uncommon. The CDC reported 16 stomach flu outbreaks on U.S. ships alone just last year.
An outbreak of a highly contagious stomach virus on board the Queen Mary 2.
The bottom line, in a situation like the Triumph,
it was the worst experience I've ever had.
There are limits to what any doctor can do.
Ship's medical departments are very well equipped.
But it sounds like, you're basically there to stabilize the patient until you can get the more sophisticated medical help, right?
Correct. You would not do surgery on board. You would evacuate.
But getting to the hospital fast is only possible if you're close enough for a Coast Guard helicopter to reach, like a man with a life-threatening condition was just over a year ago. Of course, after you land, you may want pain medication when you get the bill, as much as tens of thousands of dollars for that Coast Guard flight. But a ship at sea presents all kinds of potential hazards, and being trapped on board, particularly in bad weather, can be much worse than no bathrooms. Imagine the terror on board the Oceanos. It went down off South Africa in 1991. Fortunately, everyone was rescued. 30-foot rogue waves hit this cruise ship near Spain in 2010, smashing through windows, a direct hit on unsuspecting diners. The terrifying wave killed 2 and left 14 others injured. And look what happened on this ship during a bad storm off New Zealand in 2008. Everything that wasn't nailed down slides around or out of control. 42 people were hurt, many with broken bones. In these worst-case scenarios, people's lives may depend on their own reactions. And researchers say most of us, 80% of us, will freeze.
The vast majority of people do this. It's called denial, in essence, right?
There's a lot going on in your brain in this moment. And most of all, your brain is going to rely on its hardwired response to fear.
Writer Amanda Ripley has studied our reactions to plane crashes, sinking ferries, and burning buildings.
I think the thing that's most surprising is that your biggest threat is that you will move too slowly or shut down altogether.
That is, until others step in to lead the way. About 10% of us will take that role. On the Concordia, those take-charge types led others to safety. As for the final 10%, they completely freak out and are far less likely to survive a disaster. Cruise ships have stepped up their safety precautions and evacuation drills to ensure people are aware of what to do.
We train them what they would do in an actual emergency. We practice in the way that they might actually be expected to act and the crew would act in an emergency.
Still, passengers seem relatively unfazed. The cruise lines are confident people will sail on, anticipating nothing but happy memories.
We want both new customers and old customers to know that as a guest on our ships, they will be safe and secure.
And that is our program for tonight. I'm David